Okay, so everyone should have gotten their midterm grades. I posted them on, or posted them on Blackboard, but I graded them, so you should have gotten comments like where you missed points. Everyone did pretty well for the most part. So, any questions on that? Sorry, kind of like was a little chaotic last week. It was something that was a little out of my control, but next time I know just to make sure I clone it ahead of time so nobody has to download it from the internet. Okay, so what we're gonna do today is kind of finish, keep going with the CRUD stuff. So week 6, we just kind of did the reading part of CRUD, so the R, and today we're gonna look at the C, U, and D. So which is create, update, and delete. So okay, so let's go ahead and in the general channel, so I kind of put a command. So if you run this git command, you can clone the same repo that I finished off with from week 6. So if you want to start from there, that's cool. If you want to just start with whatever you have, that was fine too. So I'll go ahead and open that. Okay, so I'm gonna run the project. So I'll do Ember serve on there. When you clone it, make sure you run npm install inside that directory. I already did that too, but run that because it's not going to work if you try and run Ember serve. So whenever you kind of clone another Ember project or a lot of other JavaScript projects, if you see a package JSON file inside there, so in this case, like you see this package JSON right here, that's kind of like a clue just to run npm install. So that'll give you the node modules directory, which is here, and then that'll make it so you can run it. It's kind of pretty much every single JavaScript project these days runs on Node and having this package JSON for external libraries. Wait, is the right one? You know what? Let me just make sure and do it again because this could have been a different folder. Okay, so okay, so hopefully you see this. Post 1, post 2, all of that. Any questions up until this point?
Going down for real, guys.
The fans, the computer fan, yeah.
No biggie.
Oh shoot. I think this is the finished one. All right, hold on a sec. Let me figure this out. I have too many like Ember CRUD folders on my computer now.
And your jacket.
Okay, here. It might give me like 5 minutes to fix it. In the meantime, okay. So if you want to go back to the class page, I posted the final project requirements. So there's a lab that's a project proposal. So just to kind of start thinking about your project and what you're gonna do. And on here, there's a link also to the project requirements. You can find it here, and you can also find it at the top of the class page right here. So go ahead and just kind of click that and read through it and start thinking about it, and let me know if you have any questions while I kind of figure out this Ember CRUD thing. Okay, all good, I think. So delete whatever you just installed, and just go back to the general channel and just do the set of steps.
Repo is like the same as our week 6 notes.
Yeah, it's the same one. I think, but I don't. I just had too many different versions of it for whatever reason, and it got confusing.
It's fine. Oops, me too. I just npm and installed my entire folder. Oh god. Oh, that's not good.
What?
I just npm installed in my class folder. Is that gonna?
That shouldn't.
Yeah, it shouldn't do anything
If
if.
you don't have a node modules folder at the root, then you should just make a package.json you can delete.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I thought I was
Right?
gonna.
Yeah, it'll only do something if it sees like package JSON. Otherwise, it shouldn't do anything. Yeah. Okay, so did everyone kind of get to this spot? Yeah, cool. Most of you. Okay, so just to kind of review at least what this app was doing, it lists 10 posts from Mirage. So Mirage was our API. It was gave us 10 posts, and we kind of created that data randomly using factories. And then we could click on each one of these, and this is kind of like the list page, so the reading CRUD. So we're kind of reading out the list, and then we can click each one and go to a details page for that specific resource or item. And then you can see kind of all the API calls that are being made in the console. Okay, so what we're going to do today is do the create and update and the delete, so the rest of CRUD. So I think the easiest one to start off with is delete. That one's actually pretty, there's less involved. So if we want to go to the app folder and templates, and we go to index, all right, so the type of UI that I'm just kind of thinking is having like a trash can icon next to each one. So when we click it, it triggers a click event, and then we can kind of destroy it. And so does anyone kind of remember the API call that we would make if we were doing a if we wanted to delete something, kind of following the those REST API standards? Yeah, delete, right? Yeah, so it's kind of like this one where it's get API post. So this was getting post for. We would turn this into delete API post for. So same URL, just the delete HTTP method. So REST kind of makes it, there's a lot of similarities between the URLs. It's just kind of changing up that HTTP method to perform a different operation. And kind of going back to the Mirage stuff, inside of Mirage config, we can see that we already set up a delete endpoint on our back end via Mirage through this one little shortcut. So delete post ID, and it takes care of it. Okay, so what we can do on the template is let's just kind of create a button. It's not going to look very pretty, but it'll be functional. And we can just write the word delete. We could turn these into like little trash can icons or do like covers and all that kind of stuff to make it look way better. But now you kind of get the idea. Okay, so now we want to attach a click handler. So anyone remember from when you first learned JavaScript, what was the attribute name if you wanted to say, when I click on something, fire a function? Yep. Yeah, so in Ember, it's very similar. We're going to actually do the same thing. OnClick equals, so it kind of goes back to the older approach where we attach it, whereas in jQuery we said something like grab some element dot on click, and it was kind of separated. This kind of goes back to what I think people originally started with. A lot of the frameworks actually kind of do this too. And so we're going to say on click, and we're going to put two curlies, and we're going to use this keyword called action. And so action is kind of like a helper in Ember that's going to say run this function, and this function is going to have a name. And so in this case, we're going to give this function a name of delete post. You can call this whatever you want. It just has to be a string. So we're going to say when we click it, fire this action called delete post, which is basically saying fire a function called delete post. So if you go back to the Chrome, you'll see that there is an error, and it's going to say something like assertion, or let's see, an action named delete post was not found in generated index controller. And so what this is essentially saying is we never defined a function called delete post, so it's going to throw an error. So it's just kind of guiding us towards what we should do next. So where do we kind of put this function? So we learned about routes, which kind of load up your data. And we have templates, which display data. And so there's another type of object in Ember that is responsible for receiving actions, and it's the controller. And so what we can do here is you open up kind of another tab in your terminal. We're going to say Ember generate, or if you want to do Ember G for short, Ember generate controller. And this has to be the same as the route. So this route right here, if we look at the template name, it was called index. This is the index route, which is kind of the home page. We're going to generate a controller called index. So every template will have a controller associated with it with the same name as kind of the route template. So they all kind of match. And when you ran the generate command, you'll see that there's this new folder in here called controllers. So if we kind of look at this, we have this routes index.js, right? So this was one that loaded all the posts. It was called index.js, but now there's also this one called index.js inside the controllers folder. So just kind of remember like these conventions where they all kind of are named the same thing. So if we look at the controllers index.js, this is where we're going to define that delete post function. And the way, so we're going to define this action, and we have to define it in this property called action. So we're going to say actions, and it's going to be an object, and this is where that delete post function is going to be.
That's the control.
Yeah, the controller. So the controller receives the actions that were fired from that same template. There's several ways that we're going to learn how to do this as we kind of progress, but this is kind of how everybody learns initially. So if we go back to Chrome, we can see that the error at least went away because we did define delete post. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to say delete that post. So how do I know? So kind of as we're looping through model, right? Model was a list of posts, and each one of these models was an instance of this model class that we created. So this ds.model, and it had these properties like title and body. And so this model class actually comes with a few built-in methods, and one of them is knowing how to delete itself. So I can call a method, I can call a function or a method on the post model, and I can say delete yourself, and it will. and it'll fire off that delete request via the API. So we kind of need a reference to the post in here. So the way we can do this is kind of what I want to essentially do is I want to say post.destroy record. But I need to get this post from somewhere because I don't have access to it in the function. So what I can do here is I can go back to my template, and as we're looping through it, the list of posts, we have this post variable. I can pass in the post as a parameter to this action. So I'm going to say action, call this delete post function, and pass it the post. And so if I go back to my controller, I can say, okay, the first argument to this function is the post. So you can kind of specify the number of arguments or however many arguments you want to the to an action or a function, and these will be received, and you can just kind of list them out in order. So we pass the post to the delete post function, and now we can say post.destroy record. Okay, so let's kind of see this in action. So if I click on delete here, you can see that it said delete API/post2, and it was removed from the list automatically. So I can kind of go through all these, right? And it's firing this delete request, so API/post and then the ID, and it's following. So as a refresher, by default, Ember buys into the JSON API specification. So you can create APIs via JSON any number of ways, but this is kind of a standardized format that companies have bought into. Not every company does this, but at least the Ember community has bought into it. So at least when you're working with APIs, it's very standard and it's very well thought out. And so this delete request here is kind of following that standard. So if we kind of open up one of these requests, we can kind of see what's going on. We can see that the response is empty because when we delete something, we're not really expecting anything back. All we're saying is just I want to make this call to, really you just need the ID. The server needs the ID of the post in order to know which post to delete. And then from that, it doesn't really need to respond to anything. So just delete and then that specific post ID's URL.
Something strange. It's like that destroy record isn't a function. Yeah. And I'm getting like an error that says post.destroy record is not a function.
Okay, so in the template, did you do after delete post, you put space and then post?
Yeah.
And then inside the controller, inside actions.
So maybe I didn't save though. Yeah, I don't think I.
Saved it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't save it. Okay,
Cool.
So that was great.
Sweet.
Cool.
Any other questions? So here we can actually even add some more logic. So we could say, in Chrome, there's that alert confirmation. We can call confirm. It says, are you sure you want to delete? We can kind of add this here. So we could say, let's see. We could say like let should delete equals window.confirm. Are you sure you want to delete this post? Actually, let's name this to confirmation. And I'll kind of separate this out so it's easier for the screen. And so we can say if, actually I think a better name would probably be confirmed. So if confirmed, then destroy the record. So now if we kind of go to each one of these, we'll see that confirm box that we see. So if we hit cancel, it won't delete, but if we hit delete and say OK, it'll go ahead and delete. Any questions? So one thing to kind of note about all this is if we go back to the index route here, we saw that we were returning this store.findAllPost. And so you can kind of think of this like an array, but it's an array that's aware of other operations like destroy record. So, you know, this was the full list, which is what's being rendered here. But when I call destroy record, this list knows how to like remove that post from itself and automatically re-render. So we didn't have to think about like when we delete it, remove it from the UI, it just kind of kept it all in sync for us. And this is that kind of Ember data library that we're using here. It's doing all that kind of magic for us, both in terms of communicating with the API via kind of all this stuff, and then making sure our UI stays in sync. Okay, so let's go on to the create part now. Okay, so if we look at the router, we have kind of the index route, which lists everything. We have the post details route, which is just called the post route. So what we can do now is let's create the route called create. So if we go to our terminal, let's do Ember generate route. And we can call this, let's just call it create. Okay, so this added a new route here. Now let's go to our application template, and at the top, let's just say, let's put a link here and say, so we're going to use the link to, and we're going to say, so we're going to link to that create route, so that at least we have a way to get to that page. So I'll close the link to. And I'll just say something like create a post, or maybe write a post. Oh yeah, yeah, Ember G route create.
You remember you tried to install it to my computer, you dropped it in that folder, and I was like,
I do.
oops.
Oh, that was me.
Okay, so we click on write a post, we navigate to /create. Now, create sounds more like a dev term, right? We're talking about CRUD, it's create, but maybe, I think what's more common, at least in URLs, is something a little bit less dev specific. A lot of times you'll see something like post/new or something, right? If you go to a WordPress, something along those lines. So we can actually change this URL, and if I go back to the router, we can do comma, and let's just change this path. So internally in my app, I kind of want the route to be known as the create route, but I want the path to be /post/new. So I'm going to change it here. Or it could even be something like /post/write. Okay, so refresh and kind of go back to the main screen. So now if I click on write a post, our URL changed.
Can you see that again?
The code or the,
So,
oh yeah.
I also have failed to save router.js content on this disk is newer, please compare it to your version, the one on the disk.
Wait, and this just happened just by creating this route?
Before that, right before that. I didn't even touch it though, so I'm very confused. I just like brought it up.
I guess, I mean, I would say go to here and do Control C and just restart Ember server. if you get like another error. Okay, so we created this create route. So if we open up the create template, we can delete the outlet, and this is where we're going to actually put a form. So we can just type out a plain HTML form. And so I'm just going to type this one just kind of, on the faster side. So if we look at our model, there's two attributes, title and body. So let's just do kind of at minimum those two because that's all we really need. So I'm going to say, okay, so we'll say like title. Let's see, let's do this. Label, it's for the title. And we'll say input. And I'll delete this. And I'll say ID is equal to title. So just kind of as a reminder, the for and the ID go together. So if you click on this label, it highlights this text box, just kind of like usability stuff. And then we'll do the next one. So we'll say label, and this will be the, we'll call it body. As a label, I guess we'll just say post. And then instead of an input, we'll use a text area. So something like this should be fine. And at the bottom, we'll just have a button, a submit button that says publish. Okay, so like the worst looking form ever. Maybe let's put some divs around here. All right. Paste that. Not really any better, but it's okay. Did it work? If you restarted Ember server?
Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm okay.
Cool. Okay, so what we want to do is attach a submit event to the form. So kind of going back to the jQuery, right? We did something like this. We would say like grab the form, and then we'd say like on submit, and then do some function, right? This is kind of like what we did. So kind of similar to what we did with on click, we can do that the same thing with the form, and we can say on submit equals action, and we'll say create post. So now that we kind of added this action to this form, anyone know the next step? Yep, create the controller. So you see the error here, and if you kind of even look at the error, it says an action named create post was not found in generated create controller. So it kind of tells you, what the error is, which is nice. So I'm going to say Ember generate controller create. So you'll notice like all these naming conventions, like they are named similarly, at least between the route, the template, and the controller. So when you're thinking like if you were to hop into an Ember app that maybe you weren't familiar with, you would know, okay, like if I know what the route is, I can figure out what the controller and the template is just by naming conventions. Okay, so in the controllers folder, we'll go to the create file, and we'll say actions, curly braces, and we'll add that create post action.
Can you go back to the create.hbs?
Yep. Okay, so if I click on this publish button, you're going to notice that there is a page refresh, right? So it is firing the action, but it does a full, form page reload when I submit the form. So I want to prevent this default behavior. So kind of like what we did when with jQuery, we said like event.prevent default. That's kind of the same thing here. So these actions or functions receive the event object, and from here we can say event.prevent default. So that's kind of the first part. So we're preventing the submit event on the form. So now when I click it, we get no page refresh, which is exactly what we want.
So you don't have to define an event as
Oh yeah, good question. Yeah, so like with post where we had to pass it in, event is always the last argument on the action. So actually kind of going back to the index one, right here there was actually an event right here, but we just didn't need it, so but it's the last argument. Yep.
Is there a reason to use like the submit button or just like a normal button? Like so that way.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, like for a lot of cases, you can put the event like on click on the button, but some cases where you say like, I think it's like if you tab through the form and then you hit enter, you want to submit the form via enter key, but not by clicking the button. Like if you're doing keyboard navigation, that's when it doesn't get triggered. There's certain cases like that. So I think it's more standard to do this, although the on-click would work in a lot of cases. Okay, so what we kind of want to do here is kind of read out the inputs, right? And then save a post model, right? So it's kind of the two steps here. So how do we kind of get access to these values? So in plain JavaScript, we would do something like document query selector some ID dot value, right? This was kind of like the plain JavaScript, or we could do the jQuery way. Ember actually has something built in since this is so common. So with this input, we can change the angle bracket syntax to double curlies like this. And then we're going to add one more attribute. We're going to say value is equal to title. And so what this is saying, let's bind whatever the user types into this input to a variable called title. No, yeah, because these are like HTML attributes, but this is a variable name. Yeah. And we can do the same thing with the text area. So we'll kind of replace this. And actually, we can with the text area, we can get rid of the closing tag, so it just becomes like that. And then we'll say value is equal to, let's call it body. So yeah, whenever you type into these form controls, they'll automatically bind title and body, the values that were typed into these title and body variables. And these variables happen to be the same variables that what's on the controller. So any properties that we define on the controller are actually the properties that are what's in the template. So think of the controller as backing the template. Kind of any variables that are on the controller, you have access to in that template. So as we're kind of writing to these variables, those variables are kind of what's on the controller. So we can log this out and we can say this dot title and this dot body. Okay, so let's try this out. So I'm gonna say like for the title is my title and my body. And we'll say publish, and then we can see those two values logged to the console. Okay, so how do we save a post model? Or any questions kind of on that part?
I just have one
Like these kinds of errors? Because these are okay.
No, like Ember error, the session failed,
Action, something related,
activate and create post,
not defined.
not found.
Okay, so in that case, do you have actions instead of action? That's one.
Well, I didn't have actions at all.
Oh.
So
Okay, so the controller is this class, and it has the properties title and body that were bound to what's on the template. It also has the store, kind of like the model, or sorry, kind of like the route. So these routes, like the create route, in the index, or let's see, in the which one was it? Oh, yeah, in the index route, for example, we had access to a store on the route class. We can actually do the same on the create. So we can say this.store, and there's another one on the store called create record. And so the first argument to create record is the model name. So in this case, I'm going to say I want to create a post record. And this will kind of, behind the scenes, you can think of it like saying new instance of this post model. And then the second argument is the data. So I want the, so looking back at the model, we have title and body as the attributes. So we can say title colon this dot title. And we can say body colon this dot body. And we can save this in a variable called post. We can actually just delete the console log. We don't really need it anymore. And might as well delete this save the post model. So this is just creating a post instance, but it's not actually saving it to the server. So in order to save it to the server, we can say post.save. So kind of like when we said post.destroy record to delete it, post.save will do that API request to kind of save it. Anyone kind of remember what the REST convention was for creating a resource or creating something new? Yep. Yep. So the post method, anyone know the URL? Kind of based on like let's see, let's go back, refresh to these. Okay, I'll kind of do a couple of these. Okay, so we know that to create something, we use the post HTTP method. What do you think the URL might be? Yep, post. Yeah, so kind of like this one, get API/post, this returns the collection. If we just change the verb to post, this will say, tell the API, hey, this is, we're writing something or creating something, and the API should basically create something. So it would be probably inserting something into a database and returning that new thing that was created. Okay, so let's fill this out. So I'll say my title, my body, publish. Oh, I forgot to save. Okay, let's try that again. My title, my body. Okay, so there we go. We can see post/API/post, so it did the API call. And if we inspect this, it's always good to kind of like inspect the request just so you can see kind of what's going on. But we can look at the data that's sent to the server, and that's inside this request property. So you can see data, attributes, here's the body, my body, and my title. And then if we look at the response, we can see the same attributes, so my body and my title, but now there's an ID, right? So there's an ID 11. If we look at the request, when we're kind of creating something, we don't have an ID yet. Usually that ID comes from like inserting something into a database. And so the request just sends the title and the body, and then what we get back is kind of the full resource or the full post, which now includes an ID. So ID 11, because we created 10, so Mirage knows to increment it by 1. And this is all kind of following this JSON API format. Okay, so we created the resource. Now, we're still on this page, so we could probably improve the experience a bit. But if we actually just click the back button, you can see, okay, now there's my title, right? So it is in the list. Okay, so let's improve this experience a little bit so that when we hit that publish button, let's redirect back to the other one without a page refresh. So I guess you could do a couple things. We could say, let's redirect to that specific post, right? Because every time we click on one, we could either redirect to /post/11, or we can just navigate back to the list. We can do both. Okay, so in this create post action, we can say .then. So this is asynchronous, so it returns a promise. And so once the post has been saved, then we can say this.transition to route. So this is like a redirect. So we're transitioning to a route. So in the case of redirecting back to the list page, we can say let's transition to the route index. So transition to route is a method on the controller. So if I go and say write a post, let's say post 11, some stuff, hit publish. Okay, we get redirected back and we see post 11. We see the post call that was made. Yeah. Yep.
So is the data store like session based? Because when you reload the page, if you write a post and then you go back to like the root URL,
It's not.
it doesn't show up.
Yeah. It's just in memory. So like Mirage is just sort of it's just like an in-memory API, so it doesn't like really persist because there's like no database or anything. It's more of like just a development tool, just because you want to like start writing your front end and you don't want to write like the whole API first, so you just kind of you can just get these like quick APIs and then and it won't do like the full persistence. And then later you'd have to write an API that matches like Mirage and then save it to a database and then it would run. Yeah, good question. Okay, so that was kind of transitioning to the list. Now if we wanted to say let's transition to the individual post, we could say transition to route. And if we look at our router, it was post, and there's a dynamic segment which was ID. So we can say let's transition to the post route, and we're going to pass in the ID, which is post.id. So in this case, this post model instance now has an ID after we've saved it. So in this then block, it has the ID, and we can say post.id. And so this will kind of fill in that dynamic segment here. So if a route had multiple dynamic segments, we could just say, each one and just separate them with commas. But in this case, we just have one. So yeah. So transition to route will redirect us to a route from a controller. So in this case, we're going to the post route, right? which is this, and this post route has the dynamic segment ID, so it's that variable, right? And so we want to fill that variable in with the variable with the ID of the post, right? Which is available to us once we save it. Because when we create the post like this, we don't have an ID yet. It's only until we save it and the server kind of like pretends to insert it into a database and it kind of creates that ID. That's when we have it, and so that becomes the second argument. Yep. So I can say write a post. I'll say post 11. Some gibberish for the post. Hit publish. We can say, okay, we're redirected to post/11. We can leave it for this one for now. Okay, so if we go back to write a post, we still see the form filled out, right? And so ideally we want this emptied. So every time we visit the write a post route, it just starts off fresh. And so the one thing about controllers is that they're what's known as singletons, and so they're instantiated once when the application is kind of booted up. So and the properties never are really refreshed. So we have to just kind of keep track of that. And so the way we do this is in the route, if we go back to the create, there's a method called setupController. Now there's actually a better way to do this when we get into components later on, but for now, we're going to leverage this setupController function, and this receives two arguments, so the controller and the model. In this case, there isn't really a model for this. And here we can say controller.set title to an empty string. We'll do it again for controller.set body as an empty string. Now this method is actually responsible for setting the model on the template. So kind of behind the scenes, what usually happens is this, where it says something like controller.set model is model. And so if we had a model, this would be really important. But given that this route actually doesn't have a model, we don't really need this. But as a best practice, just in case like you were to add a model hook or that model function here in the future, instead of adding this, we can say this._super and call it with controller and model. So we're just kind of calling the default or kind of the parent class or the original setup controller, so that any of the default behavior that was originally there stays there, and then we're just saying, okay, let's also set these properties title and body, so whenever we enter this route, they just get reset to empty strings. So if I were to kind of fill this out, let's do that again. Post 11, fill this out, hit publish. We get here. Now I go back to write a post. It's empty. Any questions? All right, so while we're at it, let's kind of go back to the application template, and I'm also going to put a link to for the list. I'll say link to index. We'll close the link to, and we'll just say, let's just call it home. And then maybe we just put this inside of navigation. So Okay, we'll close that. So let's go to the index route. And so similar where we had a delete button, now let's add an edit button. So now we're going to kind of finish it off. And so we did the create, we did the delete, we did the read. So now we just got to edit. So now I'll kind of add another button in. And I'll just say edit. And so what I want to do when we click on the edit button is to say, let's take us to a page where we have that same form that we had in the create, but then we're going to pre-populate it with that post. So actually, instead of using a button, let's use a link, or okay, sorry, let me go back. Let's create a route. So we're going to create a route so that this kind of becomes a link to. So in the end, we're going to say pound link to, and maybe we'll call this like the edit route. So we'll say link to edit. If we save it, we're going to get an error, and it's going to say there is no route named edit. So we need to create this route. So we'll go to our terminal, and I'll say Ember generate route. We'll call it edit. And so in this route, we can see, okay, so here's the edit route. Let's open up the router.js file. And if we go to the edit page, so if I click on this, I need to know which post I'm going to edit, right? And so similar to the view post details like this, where we kind of passed along the ID in the URL, we're going to do the same with the edit. So here we're going to say, ideally we want to know which one, so we're going to pass the ID. So it'll be slash, maybe something like slash post slash ID slash edit. Since in this case we have slash post slash ID, we'll just kind of tack on an edit. So we'll go back to the router and we'll say the path is slash post slash ID slash edit. Okay, so I created this route and it has this dynamic segment ID. And if we look at the link to, we just said link to edit. So if we look at the error here, it says you attempted to define a link to edit but did not pass the parameters required for generating its dynamic segments. And so what that's essentially saying is we have the route with this path with this dynamic segment of ID, but we didn't pass that in through the link to. So what we can do here is we can pass it through by saying post.id. So kind of like just with this same exact thing, but we're linking to the edit route instead. Okay, so errors goes away. Now if I click on this, we're on the edit route, and the right ID is being passed through, so that's all good. All right, so let's copy this form and then paste it onto the edit template. So edit HBS, we'll paste it. And let's delete the on submit for now. We'll go back to that. So if we click the edit, we should see an empty form. So let's go to the edit route now. And this is going to be similar to kind of finding the post details page where, so if we look at the post, we're kind of doing the same thing, right? We're going to kind of pull the ID from the dynamic segments in the URL. We're going to find that record, and that becomes our model. So we can actually just copy this and then paste it in the edit route. So if we look at our page, it did make the GET request, so GET API/post/for, so it is getting the right one via the model hook. Now we can just go to our template, and instead of saying value as title, let's say value is model.title and model.body. So we're kind of binding it to the model's title and body attributes. And we can see the form being populated here, so it's working. Edit.js, yeah. Yeah, you get this one's just the copy of the post routes model. So now we can kind of go back to this form tag and we can say on submit is equal to action. And last time we called it create post. This time we're going to say edit post. So if we save that, we'll get the error. We look at the error and it says an action named edit post was not found inside of the edit controller. So let's go ahead and create that controller. So we'll go here and say Ember generate controller edit. So we'll generate that edit controller. And then inside the edit controller, so now we can see three here, right? The create, the edit, and the index. And I'll go to the edit one, and we'll say actions, and we'll create that action called edit post. So now the error goes away just because we defined the function, which is really nice actually, because it's easy to like mistype something. Maybe you put it like a spelling error in like a function name, and then you find out later, like once you've maybe pushed it up live, it's nice that Ember kind of tells you through just, you know, if you misspell it and stuff, just because it kind of knows about it all. So easy to prevent those kinds of errors. Okay, so if we look at this form, we're saying we're binding model.title and model.body to this input and text area. So as we're typing, we're actually changing that value on the model. And so here, when we say, when we submit the form, we're going to call edit post. And this is also going to receive that event object. So here we can say event.prevent default. And because we've already modified the post title and body attributes, we don't have to do anything special. All we have to do is just call post.save. So we need access to this post, right? So how do I get access to this post? So this post actually turns out to be the model. And so the flow of it is this route. So the model for the route was is the post that we found, and then we go to the template, and so we're binding all these things, all these inputs or form controls to these models attributes. And so because we can access model in our template here, we can actually access model in our controller as well. So we can say let post is equal to this.model. So all controllers have the model from the route. And then we can just call save. Okay, so for post 4, I'll call it, let's add some 4s on here. I'll hit publish. Okay, and now we got an error. Okay, so if we look at this error now, it says your Ember app tried to patch API/post/4. So if you kind of remember from the REST, when I went over the REST conventions in the slides, I mentioned for updating, we could use patch and another HTTP method. Does anyone kind of remember what that was? Put, yeah. So yeah, put and patch are pretty common, but the JSON API specification kind of recommends patch for reasons which kind of you can read about in there. So we just need to tell Mirage, hey, use patch instead of put. So instead of Mirage config, when we listed out these routes, we're going to just change this put to patch. And you can even see right here, it says or this.patch. So we'll just change that put to patch. Okay, so if we go back to our form, we say post, change the title, hit publish, and we can see that the patch request was made. It was 200, which means it was successful, but there's no like user feedback, right? We're still on the form, so it looks like nothing happened because we didn't see a spinner, we didn't see like a transition, anything. So maybe what we can do here is going back to the controller, we'll say .then, and we'll do a transition. So we could say this.transition to route. What would make more sense, you think? Going to the list page or the detail page? Detail? Yeah. Okay, so we'll go to post. And we'll go to post.id. Okay, so let's do this again. I'll change the title, hit publish. Okay, and then we got redirected back. So we see the patch request being made. Now, just for learning's sake, like we could have done this another way. So I wanted to show that the controller has the model via this.model. Now we could have also done this where we passed in the model like this, kind of like with the create, or let's see, I think it was I think it was the delete actually. So if we go to the templates index, right, when we said we want to delete a post, we pass the post through the action helper so that the method or the action could receive it. We could have done the same thing here where we say pass in model, which is the post. So if I were to do this and then go back here, I could say post is the first argument and then comment this out, and this would be the same thing. So just to show, like, you know, I could have passed it through the action and received it here, and to show also that the event is always the last parameter in the action. So just to kind of try this again, we'll go to post 1, we'll kind of change this, we'll hit publish, and it still works. Personally, I would just kind of go this route of passing in it in explicitly. I know it's made refactoring a tad easier in certain situations, but I would say there's like a hard right answer here. Actually, I'll just, yeah, I'll leave this commented for.
Wait, how did you do that again?
Oh yeah, so going back to the edit, I passed in model
Oh,
through the action. Yeah. And this becomes the first arg, and event is always the last.
can you go to edit again? Okay.
So kind of looking at all this, now we kind of have a full CRUD app. We did create, read, update, and delete. And if we kind of look at a diff of all this, let me kind of close this. You can see, I mean, a lot of it is template code. There's, just knowing that like controllers is where we receive actions. So we put our actions in there. And we did redirecting through that transition to route. We learned about calling save on the model, or destroy record to delete, and set up controller to kind of reset the properties when a route is loaded for the variables that's on a template. So there wasn't kind of like a whole lot of code. It's just kind of just knowing the responsibilities of routes, controllers, templates, how they all kind of play together, and just following the naming conventions. Yep.
I get why both ways for edit post work. I'm just like a little confused about like scoping, I guess. So like when you pass in when you pass model as like a function argument,
like here,
yeah, does like a reference to it get passed?
Yeah, so it's the same reference. So this model reference is the same reference from the route, which was the thing that was resolved from this, which is also this dot model. They're all referencing the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you think about kind of all the AJAX calls we would have had to do by manually if we were not using Ember data, like we got a lot for free by saying post.save or post.destroy record, all that stuff. It just and then keeping it all in sync with the UI. It's just it's a really good library. You don't have to use it with Ember. It just so happens to be kind of a lot of people use it, I think, just because it provides a lot of value. Okay, so at this point, let's deploy this thing. So there's a really easy way to deploy this entire app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a commit. So I'll just say git add all, git status, git commit. We'll say full CRUD app from week 8. And I'll say git push. Your git push, you'll have to create your own Git repo. So just make the commit and don't push yet, and then just make your own GitHub repo so that you can reference this if you want to save it. Okay, so there's this really nice service called Surge, and you can it makes kind of hosting like static websites really easy. I think they may even do more, but I've really only used it for static things like our Ember apps. And there's a nice add-on that makes this work. So kind of like Mirage. Mirage was an add-on. There's also an add-on for kind of integrating Ember CLI with Surge. And so I'll paste the link in the class notes or the channel. So if I kind of scroll down a little bit, we can see, let's run Ember install Ember CLI Surge. I'll run that. This is also how you're going to deploy your final project, which it just makes it really easy. You just like through one command, you can push it up to a live site. Don't have to think about it. No kind of like dragging and dropping through FTP and all that. You could do that if you want to, but you'd have to do a couple steps. Okay, yeah, so run Ember install Ember CLI Surge.
And so we can do that if we don't have the repo thing.
Yeah, yep. Okay, and so this, when we installed this add-on, it created this CNAME file. And so if you go down in your project, you'll see CNAME. And so it's going to give you the domain name of where this will be hosted. So it's always something.surge.sh. So we can change it. So like for the final project, I put on the description, you're all going to name it something like your USC username dash final project, something like that. In this case, let's just call it, I'll do dtang dash Ember CRUD. Hopefully, that's probably unique. So in your case, kind of use your own username. So change that in the CNAME file. And then there's one other thing. So inside config, let's see. Okay, let me look this one up. Actually, I forgot what it. Okay, so Mirage is normally a development thing because typically, like if we were launching this site to production, or which is a live site, we would be hitting a real API. So Mirage is just allowing us to fake out that entire API. But in this case, because we haven't built an API, we just want to launch our site with Mirage, just so we kind of see it working. So what I'm going to do is, if you go to config/environment.js and put this snippet in there, you're going to say env bracket Ember CLI Mirage enable true. So here we're saying in the environment production, which is what Surge is going to be when we kind of deploy it up, it's going to be production. We want to just have Mirage on. Okay, so at this point, now we can actually deploy it. So just those two configurations. The CNAME to have the custom domain, this just has to be unique. And then the environment, we're just turning on Mirage for production. If we were not using Mirage, you wouldn't have to do this. And if we go to our command line, we can say Ember Surge. So I clear this, I'll say Ember Surge. And so our entire Ember project, it's a bunch of files. So it's going to combine all those files into a single file. It's going to minify them. It's going to do a bunch of stuff, kind of stitch together the final index HTML and the final JavaScript and the final CSS. And so it's kind of doing all this building stuff that you kind of have to do when you have a project that's a bunch of files like this. And then if it's successful, it's going to say, okay, domain, which was the one we specified in that CNAME file. So I can copy this out. And if I go here, paste it in, there we go. We can see the post.
Why, what is it called? The search thing or whatever, it's still like installing it?
Oh, okay, I mean, maybe it just takes a minute. Like when you ran Ember install Ember CLI Surge, it's still going.
Yeah.
Maybe just wait a little longer.
I'm just asking to create an account.
Oh, really? Oh, maybe it's because I did that a long time ago and I haven't thought about it. Yeah, just if so, create an account and don't forget the password. It looks like it deployed, but my terminal also looks like it's hanging. So I guess just be aware of that when it deploys. I don't know why I did this, so. So now if we go here, we can kind of do all the same stuff, and we can see it working.
Do you know what the name of like the JavaScript bundle when you build it is?
Like the file names, or the
so
tool.
when you build it, like it gets pumped out to like a dist folder. Right?
Yeah. I think it even said that like stored in dist, right?
Yeah.
And so in the end, well, actually, while we're at it, so there's actually another command in all this, like that it's doing behind the scenes. Like we can say Ember build -- environment production, and you could say environment production, environment development, and that's actually being run when we said Ember Surge, so that's why the add-on was just nice. But yeah, it builds it inside this dist directory, and so you can kind of see it here, right? Like index HTML, and you can see it's doing a bunch of things like fingerprinting them, so kind of giving them a unique name, so that every time you build it, always has a unique name for so like the browser doesn't cache it, and then like somebody gets an old version. Let's see, assets. So you can see, oh, here it is. Yeah, so there's actually a couple set of files. So like the one that says CRUD dash, those are like my application specific code. So there's one for JavaScript and one for CSS. Now there's also vendor, and this is all like the libraries and add-ons and stuff, and so they bundle them up separately. You can configure it all. It just you have to look into like the docs and stuff and how to do that. But usually like this works great by default. Yeah, so if you wanted to deploy it, like you could do Ember build, copy this folder, move it, and you're good.
Okay.
Okay, so let me make a commit. So I'll go back and delete this. Actually, I'll just close that one. Okay, so I just hit Control C to kind of give me back control in this window. So I'll say git status, git add -- all, git commit, enables Mirage in production and deploys to surge.sh. I'll do git push. Okay, git status. It's all committed. Yeah, so that's one of the requirements for the final project. So you just do the same thing. So any questions on kind of the stuff today? Okay, so we went over forms, actions, controllers. And so it just looks, I don't know. It's because I have these extra bullets in here. Okay, so there's kind of two parts. There's the lab, which is a project proposal. So this is just kind of thinking about your project. You're going to install a new Ember app, and then on every Ember app, there's this README file. So you can just kind of delete all this, or you can keep it as long as you don't really change anything, and you just kind of answer these questions. So what problem are you trying to solve? Who is your primary audience? How are you going to complete these requirements? You don't have to go like bullet by bullet, but just kind of maybe just talk about like the pages. So like this page will show a list of posts. This one, I'm going to have this form to create a post. So then just to kind of get an idea, like you've thought through like the different pages and everything, and maybe some of these things you might specifically address, but just throw a general one. You don't have to like list it all out and make it really long. And then let's see. Okay, and also which add-ons do you think you'll use? So as one of the requirements, I put use at least one add-on of your choice that's not one of the ones that I listed in here. So I kind of listed a few that you have to use, like Ember CLI Mirage, this Ember CLI document title, and then Surge, which we kind of looked at today. So just kind of find another one and then check it out. Just because the add-on ecosystem is really powerful, and they make it so easy to install it, just kind of explore them and try something out. And there's a great site for that. It's called Ember Observer. So if you click on this, you can kind of they'll kind of rate them and everything, and so you can kind of just look on the right and see, okay, like what do I want? Maybe I want a Bootstrap. Well, there's Ember Bootstrap, so you can kind of get some nice integration with Bootstrap. You can get let's see, what's another cool one? Notifications. There's some like notifications like on Apple, like when it comes in the right hand corner. There's some cool stuff like that. So just kind of explore them, check out the readmes, and then think like, okay, which one might I use on my project? A lot of times, like, when you're building an app, you are just stitching together a bunch of libraries and calling, just maybe not necessarily building something from scratch. So leverage as much as you can from these open source things. Okay, so that's the proposal. So put that on the README. So at that point, like after this, you'll have created your Ember project. You'll have edited the README, and you'll at least have the installation for your project. Okay, so the assignment is you're going to recreate just a portion of Gmail. So if you think about Gmail, it's very like a CRUD type of app, right? So you're not actually going to do all of CRUD. I think I limit it to getting all emails, showing a single email, creating an email, and then deleting one. I left out edit just because it was too long. So an email is going to have these following attributes. So ID, who it's from, who it's to, the subject, and the message. And you'll have a navigation that's just a subset. So you'll say something like inbox, sent, and trash. Trash and sent are actually just going to be empty. They're just going to be empty routes. We'll kind of fill them in future assignments. And then you'll kind of have the different routes. So listing emails, which will kind of list them all. Email details, which is just showing more details about a specific email. Deleting a single email, which you'll have a trash can icon. Creating an email, kind of like what we did today, or creating a post. And then styling, you don't have to do anything crazy, but just try and do like the basic placement. So like the nav is on the left, you have the inbox on the right, the trash can, the trash can icon is actually at the top. So just kind of look at your Gmail. You don't have to go all crazy, but just get the placement instead of just kind of doing it super unorganized. Don't do what I did today, which was, this. And then you will, and then deploy it via Surge. So -gmail.surge. And I actually need to update this because I slightly did it a little bit differently. But so I'll finish it before you even get there. And you'll push it up. Any questions?
On the product proposal, you had what problem are you trying to solve? Is that just like what the purpose?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're not solving a purpose. Maybe it's just like a funny side or something, right? I guess it's, yeah, what's the purpose? That's probably better phrasing.
Okay.
Yeah, some of these things we haven't gotten to yet, so yeah, I'll fill them in. Yeah. Yeah, when you're writing the proposal, if there's things here that we didn't cover, you're not sure, just you don't have to think about it really. I guess the main ones I just want you to think about, like what are the pages, probably what Ajax calls would be on those pages, or like what type of events kind of thing, what data is shown, what add-on might you use? Yeah, for the acceptance test piece, so we're gonna learn about how to automate clicking around and verifying things work. And so this one you can kind of just think about like, I might have a test case that says when I visit this page, I see 5 posts. When I visit the create page, fill out the form, and then hit submit, I see the new post in the list, and I'm back on the list page, something like that. So,
Like user paths?
yeah, user paths, yeah. So you can kind of think of, yeah, those are the test cases.
Can you show an example of a last year project?
No,
Oh,
I'd have to dig them up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let me find something. Yeah, I'll come up with something next week. Any others?
So what kind of projects did the students in past semesters do?
Finn, what'd you do? I forgot.
Let's see, for this class, I believe the requirements have changed a little, but not that much. I did like a DJ set list viewer thing where you had like a list of set lists and then a list of tracks in each, and you edit the metadata. And then it did some like web scraping, so you could click on like a play button for any of the set lists, and it would, if it was a YouTube link, it would load an embedded YouTube video. If it was a SoundCloud link, it would load an embedded SoundCloud play or something for every track, so you can just play them in order.
I think I remember somebody doing like a travel site. So if they wanted like a blog or like a social networking kind of travel site, so everybody could create like their own posts and share photos and all that kind of thing. It was all saved via, well, yeah, it wasn't like anything persisted similar, but it was enough to kind of simulate that effect. So you could like log in and create content, and other people could see your content and like add a friend and something. So I guess really whatever comes to mind. Luckily, like you don't have to build an entire API, so you don't even have to think about the backend. Like Raj can handle a lot of the cases. So like if you just want to create, edit, and read things, like it'll just make it a lot easier. So you don't have to think like, is it possible? And Raj, like it probably is. Cool. All right. So I guess we'll end for today.